U.S. President Donald Trump says most trade deals will be finished by August 1st. But as for us,
we haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. I think Canada could be one where they'll just pay tariffs. Not really a negotiation.
President Donald Trump just said the U.S. has not necessarily been focused on this country and trade. Also, he says the United States may not reach a negotiated trade deal with Canada.
A short but explosive statement sent shockwaves through the market. We might just impose tariffs. No need for a negotiation with Canada, Donald Trump declared coldly before departing Washington for Scotland. While Japan and the EU rushed to secure new trade frameworks with 15% preferential tariffs on cars, Canada stands isolated, locked in a tense standoff. With the August 1 deadline looming, failure to reach a deal means a crushing 35% tariff on Canadian goods outside the CUSMA, the USMCA protection. The burning question now is Canada really in control, or is Ottawa gambling with the nation's economy under mounting U.S. pressure? In his press conference, Trump was blunt. We haven't had much luck with Canada, and there may just be a tariff. Analysts say this is classic Trump, pushing tensions to the breaking point to force concessions. But this time, he openly stressed unilateral tariff authority, something U.S. law has long permitted under the 1977 International Economic Emergency Powers Act.
Hot on the heels of senior Canadians declaring progress and encouragement after D.C. meetings.
I had a productive, cordial discussion meeting with Secretary Lutnick.
We don't have a deal with Canada. We haven't been focused on it.
Unlike Japan or the EU, Canada appears calm. But insiders suspect this calm masks a tense backroom battle. Why is Ottawa holding back, even as Japan agreed to the 15% rate? CUSMA advantage, about 80% of Canadian exports to the U.S., particularly autos and agriculture, remain tariff-free if they meet rules of origin requirements. 35% tariff only hits a smaller slice, steel, aluminum, and softwood lumber, which are already taxed.
We're going to continue to do the difficult work and take the time necessary until the Prime Minister decides that the deal that's on the table is the best deal we can get. So,
avoiding a bad deal, Ambassador Kirsten Hillman and Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc repeatedly stated Canada will only sign a deal that's right for workers. Prime Minister Mark Carney warned a hurried concession now could cripple Canada's position in the 2026 CUSMA review. The government is clearly buying time, betting that Washington will blink closer to the deadline. Not everyone shares Ottawa's patience. Ontario Premier Doug Ford snapped back. We buy more goods from the U.S. than Japan, China, Korea, the U.K., and France combined. Canada is America's #1 customer. We don't have to sit quietly and take this.
I've always said, David, we buy more products than China, Japan, Korea, UK, France together, and actually a lot more than Mexico as well.
Ford urged a Buy Canadian campaign, urging provinces to purchase homegrown steel, aluminum, and cars to retaliate. Yet even he admitted this is not a long-term solution, as Canada remains heavily dependent on the U.S. market. Despite Carney's firm rhetoric, the economic impact is real. Auto exports plunged 30% in the first half of the year. GM Canada posted a 35% drop in Q2 profits, while Stellantis reported a $2.7 billion net loss, mostly due to steel and aluminum tariffs. Plants in Oshawa and Windsor are warning of potential shutdowns if the 35% tariff kicks in. Public frustration is boiling online. We're paying for political pride, one user wrote. Thousands of jobs will vanish if Ottawa keeps stalling. Yet many also support Ottawa's stance. A bad deal now will only lead to worse concessions in 2026. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc, fresh from Washington, insisted talks with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick were constructive and positive. But he also admitted, we must prepare for the worst-case scenario. Ottawa has already rolled out temporary support packages for steel and aluminum industries, effectively buying more time for negotiations.
I wish that I could say it feels good that this is all going to be taken care of before the 1st of August, but I'm not sensing that.
Christopher Sands, director at the Hopkins Center for Canadian Studies, believes Trump's rising rhetoric may signal the talks are actually close to a deal. The U.S. president often escalates right before signing. Still, with Trump openly hinting at bypassing negotiations and imposing tariffs outright, no one in Ottawa dares bet that August 1 won't deliver a brutal 35% blow. Trump is forcing Canada into a harsh choice: accept an early deal with potentially unfavorable terms, or endure a turbulent summer under a 35% tariff wall. Prime Minister Mark Carney and provincial leaders may speak of national unity, but political and economic pressure is climbing fast. And if factories keep shutting down and workers lose their jobs, Canadians will inevitably start asking, is Ottawa really protecting workers or just protecting its pride?
Consumer boycotts are the reason that President Trump and some of his team have referred to Canada as being mean and nasty to deal with.
Ontario's premier says Canada needs to match President Donald Trump's tariffs dollar for dollar.
Donald Trump doesn't usually hold back, but this time, his words triggered something deeper than political drama. Standing before a crowd of business leaders in Washington, his hand-picked ambassador to Canada explained why Trump sees Canadians as mean and nasty to deal with. Not because of military threats or major trade violations, but because Canadians are quietly boycotting U.S. travel and refusing to buy American alcohol. On the surface, it sounded like a throwaway insult, but what it revealed was something far more telling: that the Canadian public's grassroots reaction, one without protests or megaphones, was working. It began with tariffs. Steel, lumber, aluminum, sectors deeply tied to Canadian jobs, were suddenly slapped with high U.S. duties in early 2025. Then came the rhetoric. Trump's remarks about Canada taking advantage of America sparked anger and confusion. Instead of shouting back, Canadians changed their habits. By July 2025, according to data from international travel platforms like Hopper and Expedia, flights from Canada to the US dropped by over 26%. Alberta and British Columbia led the decline. Meanwhile, Canadian liquor boards from Ontario to Quebec reported a dramatic drop in American alcohol sales. In some cases, shelves were restocked entirely with domestic or European brands. At the same time, retail movements like Buy Canadian surged. Independent shops across Ottawa, Montreal, and Vancouver said their sales of Canadian-made goods had doubled compared to the same period last year. What started as a reaction became a movement, and it got Washington's attention.
Obviously, Canadians are outraged. I say Canadians stick with it, hold the line.
BC Premier David Eby says Hoekstra's remarks show Canada's efforts to stand up to Trump are, quote, having an impact.
If Trump thought provinces would buckle under pressure, he misread the room. British Columbia Premier David Eby publicly challenged the tone coming out of Washington. He didn't just defend the boycott, he said it was proof that Canadians were finally being heard. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford took a different but equally firm approach. Instead of backing down, he called on Ottawa to respond with equal tariffs, dollar for dollar. In his words, showing weakness would only invite more pressure. Across the political spectrum, premiers aligned on one message: Canadians have the right to protect their economy and sovereignty, even if that means spending differently.
We should note
to our friends and neighbors in Canada, the Granite State sends you our greetings and says we miss you.
The ambassador's comments may have sparked outrage, but not everyone in the U.S. echoed that tone. Just days later, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators visited Ottawa. Unlike the ambassador, they didn't criticize Canadians. They expressed concern. New Hampshire's Maggie Hassan and Nevada's Catherine Cortez Masto noted how their states were already feeling the pain. Canadian tourism was down, shopping districts were quieter, and hospitality jobs were at risk. In Nevada alone, Canadians usually account for 30% of international visitors. That number has sharply declined this summer, and with it, millions in revenue. What Canadians chose to do with their vacation dollars was no longer a small matter. It was reshaping cross-border economics.
Many in Ottawa say Trump's rhetoric just strengthens their resolve to buy Canadian and boycott travel down south.
Some might say skipping a trip or switching a brand is too small to matter. But collectively, these choices created pressure, the kind that even Trump's administration couldn't ignore. This wasn't about emotion, it was about agency. Canadians didn't need to shout, their wallets spoke for them. And if those choices made them seem mean and nasty, then perhaps that label was never really an insult, but a sign of strength.
I think Trump is Trump, and we listen to him, and then we just let one thing, what he says, go through one ear and out the other.
In the end, this moment isn't about diplomatic language, it's about posture. Trump may dominate headlines, but Canada, quietly and collectively, is demonstrating resolve. Not through threats, not through deals, but through everyday decisions made by people, provinces, and premiers to stand their ground, protect what's theirs, and define what kind of neighbor they choose to be. Because if mean and nasty means refusing to bow under pressure, then Canada is wearing it well.
But I just signed the largest trade deal in history. I think maybe the largest deal in history with Japan.
Of course, Canada's relationship is far more integrated across the border than Japan's economy is with the United States, but it's still a good, valuable piece of insight.
President Trump just made headlines with what he calls the biggest trade deal in U.S. history. Japan, America's longtime ally, agreed to a 15% tariff on its auto exports to the U.S., down from the 25% that had been threatened earlier this year. In return, Japan pledged a massive $550 billion investment into the U.S. economy, aimed at energy projects, rare earth supply chains, and domestic manufacturing. At first glance, it looks like a classic Trump win. But for trade watchers, and especially Canada, it's something else entirely. The deal with Japan is not the end of a negotiation cycle. It's the opening move in a broader strategy. And now, that strategy is facing resistance.
The Japanese, very close allies with the Americans, and they're going to be hit with a 15% tariff. So are we, and that the president has basically said, look, no country will be exempt from tariffs. We're not going back to 2 or 3%. There will be a baseline of 10 or 15%, even for close allies.
The Japan deal came with terms that raised eyebrows in Ottawa. Despite the flashy investment number, Japan failed to secure the removal of key sectoral tariffs, particularly on steel. Those Section 232 tariffs remain in place, and the 15% auto tariff is still 5 times higher than the rate Japan faced before Trump returned to office in January 2025. For Canada, the implications are serious. If even Japan, with all its leverage, couldn't get a full exemption, then the odds of a no-tariff deal for Canada look slim. But here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of rushing to follow Japan's lead, Prime Minister Mark Carney is choosing a different path, one that signals confidence, not desperation. His government is now shifting from defense to offense. The goal? If the U.S. insists on keeping baseline tariffs, Canada will push to eliminate the sectoral ones on steel, aluminum, lumber, and autos. And if Trump won't move, then Canada is prepared to act on its own terms.
I have no problem, but I don't trust President Trump as far as I can throw him. He constantly changes his mind. It's you just don't know who you're dealing with.
This isn't just a federal effort. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, speaking from Huntsville, put it plainly, Canada buys more from the U.S. than Japan ever will. $349 billion a year compared to Japan's $79 billion, based on U.S. Census data from 2024. Canada isn't a minor partner. It's the customer that pays the bills. Across the provinces, that sentiment is catching on. From Alberta to Nova Scotia, premiers are pushing for deeper domestic production of steel, clean energy, and critical minerals. There's growing investment in SMRs, small modular nuclear reactors, and new energy pipelines that bypass U.S. dependency altogether. Canada's message is simple. If Washington won't ease the pressure, Ottawa and the provinces will make sure Canada no longer needs to ask.
He's our friend, and I don't consider Americans enemy. But right now, President Trump himself is acting like the enemy.
The Trump administration has used tariffs to pressure partners into action. But this time, the strategy might backfire. In recent months, Canada has quietly built economic leverage of its own. Imports of American steel and alcohol are already down. Tourism to the U.S. has fallen by more than 60% since the first round of tariffs in March 2025, according to Statistics Canada. That's not just political protest, it's real economic impact. Now, as Trump promotes the Japan deal as a model for future negotiations, Ottawa is studying it closely, not to copy, but to counter. The logic is clear. If Trump demands concessions to secure investment, Canada can demand fairness in return for access. And if that doesn't happen, Carney's team is preparing for a selective pushback through tariffs, market diversification, and regulatory shifts that affect U.S. companies operating in Canada. Trump's deal with Japan was supposed to set the tone. Instead, it may have triggered a new dynamic. Canada is no longer simply reacting to tariffs. It's rewriting the rules of engagement. Mark Carney isn't chasing a deadline. He's building leverage. And across Canada, premiers are reinforcing that stance, with pipelines, with manufacturing, and with a growing appetite to reduce dependence on U.S. markets. August 1st is the next marker in this negotiation. But for once, it's not just Trump setting the terms. Canada is now playing its own game, and it's doing it with eyes wide open.